right, let's see. This working? Hi, everybody. Afternoon. You know what? There's about 30, 40 people in here. It's about 30, 40 more people than I thought would show up today. It is an absolutely gorgeous day outside. It is after lunch. And look at the mood lighting here, you know. I feel like we're going to get close in the next 45 minutes. All right. We are here to talk about governance today. So if you're not here to talk about governance, you might want to find the other session. But because I always like to give that disclaimer, because nobody ever wakes up and goes, wow, I want to talk about paperwork and governance and boards. So again, really excited that y'all are here today. My name is Karen Cole. I am the CEO of Assura, and we're a cybersecurity firm. And I have spent a good portion of my life in the governance realm, and more importantly, dealing with governance issues. So as we talk today, I'm going to be gearing my talk more towards like the common problems that come up, the common structure, issues, and sort of like the big things that really impact people when it comes to governance. Now, that being said, I could stay here for 2 days and somebody would kill me after about 2 hours. So we won't do that. But if you do have questions, I want you to stop me. The gentleman in the back in the pink shirt, is that an Assura shirt? Or purple? Yeah. Your questions are first today. Above anybody else, thank you very much. All right. We've got some young people in here, but we got a lot of people my age too, which is good. Anybody remember Car Talk? Yeah. Right? Remember Stump the Chump? I got something green in my car. It smells like almonds. What is it? Oh, it's whatever that problem is. Today is like Stump the Chump, right? If you do have any questions, I've probably in 20 years been there, done that. I've got yelled at by politicians. I've taken CEOs and agency directors through their own temper tantrums, all the way towards really difficult planning. So feel free. This is a good place to stop and ask questions today. And it's generally a topic that isn't hit a whole lot in security conferences. So that's why I was really excited to be able to talk to y'all today. All righty. Now, a couple of things. They don't have the clicker, so I have to move back and forth. Any of you all that know me, that have seen me speak before, I constantly move around, so I'm going to apologize. Some of you are going to see some of you are going to see my butt before. And some of you also know I'm a potty mouth, so I am going to clean that up today. But you're going to see my backside as I am going back and forth to advance the slides. All righty. I love this conference, by the way. I speak at about 4 national conferences a year, and I always have to wear heels and pantyhose and stuff like that. It's all uncomfortable. Here, I get to wear my tennies, I get to wear comfy clothes, and that makes me so much happier. So hopefully that will reflect in the presentation today. But I just think this is fantastic. Alrighty, so for those of you that don't know me, the way I got into the business was I used to be an executive at Capital One. And anybody from Capital One in here, old Cap One folks? Okay, keep your hand raised if you were at Capital One in 2003 during the MOU. Yeah, wasn't those fun times, right? So in 2003, what had happened was Capital One was put on a memorandum of understanding with the Federal Reserve. And one of the major issues was we had not addressed disaster recovery, and especially those intersections with corporate risk. So after kicking the can for several years, the Federal Reserve said, well, that with some other issues, we're going to put you on an MOU. And MOU means that you can't grow your accounts, right? So Capital One said, we are going to pay to make this problem go away. Between resources, between the effort of our employees, we're going to make this happen. So I was one of the leaders on the team for a project called MICDIREX, because everything, if you've been at Capital One, everything has a special name. We just can't call it the Disaster Recovery Project, because what's fun is that, right? We have to give it an acronym that nobody's going to remember 20 years later. So the first piece was I was in charge of all of middleware. My background was being a technician, and then being a technical manager. So when that happened, all of a sudden, I was at the senior leadership of the organization having to talk about these types of issues, right? And I wasn't prepared because they don't prepare you in IT, right? What is the number one objective in IT? You might know? You all deal with it every day. Don't get bothered. Don't let it break. It's like the electricity, right? Nobody notices it when it's running, but you sure as hell notice it when it's not. That's all of our careers in IT. So for that, I was constantly, in that learning mode, right? Then, afterwards, I went ahead and I started my own company. And I found that I was in the same situation, right? But not only was I trying to deal with, okay, you really want this. You just don't know you want it. But now it's like, well, really, Karen, if you want to help us, you've got to get us through governance, right? It's not just enough to sell it to the CIO or the CISO. Now, you're going to be at the pointy end of the spear because we want to make sure that if anybody's going to be pissed off, they're going to be pissed off at you. And quite frankly, use consultants for that because they're not going to remember us when we're gone, right? You want to be pissed off at the consultant if they have to deliver bad news, not necessarily yourself, right? So that's sort of, the phase 2 of it, right? Was then all of a sudden I found myself in front of boards of supervisors, right? State boards. Found myself at executive boards all across, right? And having those conversations about, okay, you are 8 to 20 people in a governance role that are legally responsible for this organization. You don't understand anything about information security or cybersecurity, so how do I make this important to you, right? Because I know that when I'm done, you've got 20 other people that are behind me on the agenda that are going to scream that the sky is falling too. Right? So how do I make that an issue? Now, so far, what I've talked about, does this resonate with anybody in their careers? Right? And again, since it's Friday afternoon, and oh, by the way, I am a graduate of ECU. We were talking earlier. I have fallen asleep in this room while getting my degree. And I was like, it's like the circle of life, full circle. If I put any of y'all to sleep today, it'll be like I've done my job, life goals. But we do have some practitioners in the room as well. So if I'm stopping anywhere, you have something to add, please feel free to do that. But also, thoughts as we're going through this, your own experiences, that's what makes presentations fun, right? Not just hearing me run my mouth, and any of y'all that know me know I can run my mouth for a long time. See, Chandos is like, oh, yeah. So there's that. All righty. So that was my keep calm moment, right? My intro into everything, and then sort of, the bumps and the hurdles. So it was interesting because I kept seeing a pattern emerge, right? Now, most of us, we love security. We've drank the Kool-Aid, right? But most people out there have not. Most executives, they just want it to go away. It's that other stuff they want to have handled. So I started seeing this pattern, and this pattern was like the 5 stages of grief, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, let's test this out. So about 8 years ago, I started doing research into the 5 stages of grief. And then I saw, oh my God, that's what's happening. People are getting these information security mandates, programs, requirements, they've been hacked, what have you, and they're in the 5 stages of grief. So when I changed my approach to governance, right, and said, okay, as we're going through this, making sure that we are sensitive to where they are in the grief cycle, it's much better for everybody involved. Now, we have some practitioners in the room. All of y'all, let's just first make sure we're on the same sheet of paper. What is governance? What is governance to you? Pain in the ass is an acceptable response. Right, but really, in your organization, what is governance?
Chain of responsibility.
Responsibility, what else? Some reason to watch.
Which roles are responsible for what? I guess it's the same thing, but like role management.
Yeah.
Making sure people are have what they need to do.
Yeah, it's oversight.
Ownership.
Yeah, it's ownership, it's oversight. Really, and I'm going to use this for my Capital One folks in the room, and if your eyes twitch, I'm going to see it. That'll be fun. It is getting the right information to the right person at the right time. Y'all remember that? They had it printed on everything. Just welcome to my therapy session for 45 minutes. All right. So really, that oversight piece has become more and more complex, right? It used to be, hey, if we just had our financial controls in place and somebody wasn't skimming off the top, then we were good. But now, for many of you all that don't necessarily operate at that level, laws, now these board members are legally responsible for security. And it's not just in government, right? Nothing scares the hell out of a board member or an agency director in the Commonwealth than knowing two things. One is, if you overdraw your budget, you got to open up your personal checkbook and write a check. And then the second one is that you're responsible for a data breach and any fines that come to that. In the private sector, how did the data breach work out for the ISO of Target? Right? Or the CEO of Target? It's a career-limiting move. So that whole aspect of governance and that communication that's going back and forth to see where we are as far as our state of security has become even more important. But guess what? Most people are struggling is what does that governance structure look like, right? And it's not as complex as you think. Now, in larger organizations, the one thing that I do remember was that there was the committee of the subcommittee of the side committee of the front committee that was all going to work on some policies, and then maybe in 5 years something would happen, right? Or there's so many policies that, they're often conflicting. We're not going to get into all of that today, but if you do have that situation, I'm happy to talk to you after the presentation because there are some ways that you can deal with it. What I'm mostly talking about today is people that are struggling with what does good governance look like? And if I don't have it, how do I get it? Right? Because at the end of the day, I want you to have what you want. So, the first thing is understanding. Oh, me? All right. The first thing is understanding leadership. I don't know why that slide didn't go in there. But the first thing is understanding leadership. And there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. Most of us, we have our plates full. Everybody has their plates full. Who in the hell is not busy, right? You want to do your piece, you want to hand it to the next person and let them do their piece. And if it comes back to you, you just want to clear your plate. But in governance and things like that, you're going to have to think broader, right? I want to put you in the position of being your own CEO. That's the level that you're going to be dealing with. Or agency director for the Commonwealth or government organization. So the first thing is understanding the leadership dynamic. You cannot appear to not know what's going on. Does anybody want to follow a leader that doesn't know what the hell is going on? You see blood in the water in an organization when they change leadership. What's the next thing you see? Exodus, right? I've been doing this game a long time. And even in my small company, right, and I see it with all of the executives that I deal with, you have to have an air of confidence. You have to be decisive. So that's the first thing in understanding their need to make sure that they feel comfortable, that they can function appropriately in this role. And that's the role of oversight of security. Well, what's the first thing that most executives don't know? Security, or IT for that matter. If they thought IT sucked and they didn't get it, they're really struggling with security. But they're also scared at the same time because they know, they're responsible for it. So there's that concept of non-disclosure. I don't know how many different marketing campaigns that have used that term trusted advisor, right? Are we sick of seeing trusted advisor yet? Or is it just me? It may just be me. But that piece is, yeah, I mean, there is that piece of trusted advisor that, you know, you have to be able to have a confidential conversation, that they have to be able to ask the questions, right? But guess what? They're not going to feel, nobody feels comfortable in divulging that they don't know what's going on if they only see you or the person that they're supposed to be talking about with these sensitive security matters once a year. That's not how you develop a relationship. The other piece is that if they are having that conversation with you and you go out the room and you run and tell a whole bunch of other people, right? Because, hey, it's great to have a conversation with the top head of the organization. But if you go out and you violate their confidence, you won't get a second conversation. The other thing that you have to deal with is the fact that many of you all report through an IT leadership change as CIO. And recognizing that that's scary for them. That if you're going to transcend, jump that leadership level, and you're going to that top level of the organization, the CEO or the board, and you screw the pooch, guess what? It goes all the way back down. So then you will get people pushing back in your own leadership chain, and you're like, what the heck, right? I thought we were supposed to all be on the same team here. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the first role of governance and me helping you to get what you want, you get what you want, is to recognize that this is not a technical discussion. This is not a project discussion. This is an emotional discussion. In my time, I have seen the role of the CISO go from an individual performer to a manager. Now it's an executive, and sometimes that executive role exceeds the CIO's position. And in doing that, yeah, there's an element. You can't be a CISO and not know technically what's going on. You're not going to last 5 minutes. On the other hand, if you're a CISO and you don't have a level of emotional intelligence, now you're not going to last 5 minutes either. So as we go through this, and we're talking about getting people through the 5 stages of grief, that doesn't mean that you need to be a therapist, right? But it does mean that you're going to need to put down the technical piece for a minute, and you're going to need to start to deal with more on the soft skill side. And I will tell you I get a lot of people, I mentor a lot of people as I teach through VCU that are in the master's program. I mentor people that are trying to become executives in organizations. And that's where I spend the majority of my time. It's not necessarily, you know, the technical piece, because people get that, they understand that. But having that emotional intelligence is the key to how you advance in your career. And besides that, playing nice in the sandbox with others, right? Because nobody wants to be around an a-hole when you're at the leadership team level. By the way, as a CEO, only the CEO is allowed to be the a-hole. All right, so hopefully, you know, depending, you may already know the 5 stages of grief. If you've paid $225 an hour to a therapist, they might have introduced you to this. But if not, let us review. 5 stages of grief. The first stage is denial. This can't possibly be happening, right? We're going to go through each one of these stages and talk about how you shift the conversation. But the first one is, you know, just overall, just not happening, denial. Then the anger. Now, I will tell you, as we go through this, I find people that will get in anger and they will stay in anger. And that is the biggest thing that kills your governance attempts, is if you can't get them out of anger. Bargaining, right? What does bargaining look like? We're going to talk about how people get down to, well, if I put 5 cents over here to security, I can take 10 cents away from over here, right? Or what controls? What won't they find out, right? They can't possibly get us for everything. Depression. I don't know if it's your depression, their depression, Sometimes it was my depression. When I got yelled at by a couple of state senators, I was back in the anger phase. It depends, right? But some people get into depression, and they'll stay there too, right? And then the last one is acceptance. And we'll talk a little bit about what acceptance looks like and can they truly be there sometimes. All righty. So, the leadership dynamic. We talked a little bit about it. But these are a couple of the things that I normally see that I like to caution people about. Well, we can't be the only one having the problem, right? There's 14 other banks out there that don't have an information security program. Wrong answer. There's other agencies that don't have any resources, and they do just fine. No, they don't. Anybody looked at Facebook? We all have. What do people put on Facebook? How freaking perfect their lives are. Right? Nobody puts that, hey, my kid's an a-hole, you know? And speaking of kids, I thought you all would run fast after lunch today, but the only thing people that I thought would run faster are my 15-year-old twins from Glen Allen High School. They're like, we getting out of school today? We getting out of school? No. So as we go through this, the next piece is we talked about the non-disclosure, right? And that element of what is said in the room stays in the room, right? If you can, in building that one-on-one relationship with them, establishing up front that, yeah, you know what, I understand you're going to have questions, and whatever you say to me is not going to leave, and then keep it. We're losing them. Other piece of the leadership dynamic that I deal with people on is don't make their eyes glaze over, right? That's fantastic that we understand every nuance of a threat that's out there. They don't want to understand that. Because think about it this way. You pull out your sheet of all your data, right? And you're like, look at the security threat and this is awesome, and look at the tool that's going to fix it. Now, if they whipped out and they said, look at this balance sheet. This is some sexy stuff right here, right? Look at the accounts payable report. It's the same thing, right? What's interesting to us is not interesting to them. It can be overwhelming. So right-sizing it. And really, at the end of the day, when I say help me to help you, my staff always laughs at me. They come into my office, they got a problem, and I'm like, okay, you got to bullet down. Help me to help you. What do you really want? What are we really talking about here? Right? So all of this, and working on that emotional intelligence is the foundation of getting you what you want. All right, so let's talk about the phases. Denial. We're going to go through some of these, and I really want you all to tell me whether or not you're seeing them, right? Mainly because from a therapy standpoint, I don't like to be alone in my own neuroses. I like to share it. So, the first one, there is no way that this is going to be required, right? And that's usually in the compliance-focused leadership. We're only going to do what's absolutely required. Now, if the standard said, well, we don't really need access management, right? But everything else is fantastic. They'd be like, screw access management, okay. So this is where you have to help them to see the bigger picture, right, of security. The next one, not my job. Well, at that level, you're not going to see an executive say, not my job, but the gatekeeper that you have to get through to get to that executive is going to say, not my job, and spotting it. My perfect one, when usually I do audits, or used to when I used to do a lot of client work, audits, but I also did a lot of audit defense. I love that phrase. Cha-ching. They can't take the whole bank, company, whatever down because of this. Oh, yes, they can. Regulators live for that, right? Then What we don't know can't hurt us. Okay, I really want to see hands now. Anybody heard that one? What they don't know can. Yeah, right? And then this is just a paperwork exercise. Now, I'll tell you, 10 years ago when I started these conversations, well, actually 11 years ago at my company, I heard that all the time. Nah, because really the breaches weren't that prominent, right? The nice thing is you don't see it a whole lot anymore unless you've got you'll see it at the board level when you have a much older board. Then you bring up a couple of data breaches that they've heard about in the news, they start connecting the dots, you don't hear it so much anymore. But the common behaviors, amnesia, you've brought it up 14 times in your status reports, right? Or your board reports or your executive reports, but they just don't remember it. Lack of priority. How many people feel like or have seen their information security project at the bottom of the list? Because, hey, that's a cost, and we've got 14 other projects that contribute to the bottom line here. Avoidance. Oh, yeah. We're doing the strategic plan, and that's going to be year 2 to 3. And it's always year 2 to 3. And now you're 5 years in. You have kids that are older than the line item on the strategic plan. And then the isolation, right? Well, that we're going to do security, but it's going to be that one person over there. And whatever you do, don't impact any of the other departments, right? Because we don't, we can't stop for cybersecurity. We got to make the bottom line. All right, so let's talk about how to fix it. Well, first thing is to recognize why it's occurring, right? It's occurring because it's a defense mechanism. If I am constantly arguing with you, right, about whether or not we need security, then I don't have to address the fact that we need security. It's funny because I've dealt with a lot of legal counsel. I've dealt with legal counsel in leadership roles, like as agency directors. I've dealt with them on boards, things like that. What do lawyers like to do? Argue. That's what they're paid to do. So, recognizing that sometimes it can be feeding into that. Then the next piece is, what do you do about it? Or understanding it. Mostly people are defending because they're overwhelmed, right? We all get that way. What happens when you're overwhelmed? You want somebody to give you hope, right? Not tell you it's still going to hell in a handbasket, right? But what happens a lot of times is that we have frustrated information security officers that have been doing the hard work for years. They finally get their audience with the executives, and that's the first thing that happens. I'm going to tell you everything that I've been storing up for 10 years. Blech. And then now you've got an overwhelmed executive that will live in the land of denial for as long as they're allowed to. Now, the action. To get somebody out of denial, many times they have to get used to the concept. And that means the gone but not forgotten. Those conversations. Putting a little bit back in front of them. Hey, this requirement is here. We have an action plan to talk about that. When would you like to talk about that? Oh, next month? Okay, let me follow up with you then. And keeping consistent on it so that they see that it's not going away. Now, what I have seen are CISOs that will go, okay, I'll see you in a month. Yeah, right. Well, screw that. Well, if this isn't important to them, it's not important to me, and I'm not following up next month. Right? It happens. So then the other piece that you start to do is you start to look at and go, okay, what's missing here? If they're overwhelmed, the immediate response is in education. They're not going to read NIST or whatever other manual you put in front of them, right? Executives have a very short attention span. Presentation, you got 3 slides, maybe 5 if they're feeling generous. Maybe 1-page handout that you leave behind. and just hit the major points. What are the critical things that they need to know in a language that they understand? So, has anybody done any sort of board education here or executive education on cyber? Okay, I'm going to ask you, did what I say ring true? You can use your voices at this point in the process. So go ahead.
No more than 5 dot points on a slide.
Huh?
No more than 5 dot points on a slide.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, because I have seen people that are like, okay, I've only got 3 slides, and they jam-pack everything in at 8-point font. If I'm going big, go big or go home, right? All right, the next one, which most of us are used to, is when the organization is in anger, right? Either the executive or the board. I usually get this a lot at the board phase. And that's usually when they're told what they're responsible for. That's usually when you break the news of, oh, by the way, you're legally responsible for this, and can you sign this policy? So, my personal favorite one is the business tax. And I look at them and I go, okay, if security is a business tax, is accounting a business tax? You wouldn't dream of running an organization without an accounting department and checks and balances. We don't do everything by paper anymore. Same concept. So as you go through there, and recognizing those behaviors, the big thing is the blaming. And mostly the blaming, depending, is external regulators, right? How many of y'all are in regulated industries, right? Okay, so those external regulators, those evil regulators that do nothing all day but sharpen their pencils to come in and make it so difficult for us to operate. Well, that usually leads to some sort of passive-aggressive behavior. Well, and that could be, they stand you up 3 times for a meeting to talk about the issue. This is where regulators help you out. Hey, Deborah, how long do you, as an auditor, do you wait for people to blow you off before you do a finding? Not too long, right? And Deborah's been doing, when she used to do audits, she was doing them fairly regularly. After a while, an auditor or the regulator doesn't care. But that's where you find that they're in the anger phase. And then the low man-itis. Anybody ever been in an organization where they started an information security program and they made the administrative assistant the ISO? I have. And they're like, can I copy it off the internet? That's my favorite one, by the way. Can I get the policy standards and guidelines from the internet and do a find and replace? Sure. How's that going to work for you? All right, the next one's bargaining. Those extreme control avoidance, right? We're only going to support you in doing half the work that you need to do. They can't possibly get us the first time around. Oh, yes, they can. Then the elaborate plans. I do have to chuckle because when I'm dealing with folks in this stage, many times the elaborate plans to avoid the control, is worse than if they just did it. And then focusing on the should and not on the action. Well, that's when they usually pick apart some sort of requirement. Now, I will tell you, from non-regulated industries, it's coming down in contracts, left and right. That's usually the gotcha, right? So if you're doing work with another organization and the T's and C's of the contract, you will have information security. You will maintain SOC 2. You will do blah, blah, blah. And they go, well, is it really in there? Yeah, it's coming down. It's a pass-through requirement. So their regulators now become essentially your regulators. But, if it didn't say should, but could or would or whatever else I want to put in there, then we don't have to do it unless it should. I always love that. All right. The reason that people aren't bargaining is because they're trying to maintain control. So feeding into that and giving them something to make a decision about is really important. The other piece is I do want to focus on the action here. Because most people will sit and bargain. When you finally got their attention and now they want to bargain back and forth, you need to come in there with an action plan, 1 to 3 years. Don't just do a quick hit task plan, because otherwise in year 2, when the budget gets tight, guess what's going to happen? They're going to cut it. So they need to see that this is an ongoing program. Then redirecting the conversation. What can we control? Executives, when you're having those conversations, changing the discussion where they have something to make a decision about is important. And then the depression. I mean, that's pretty standard, right? If we've all, been in high school, we know what depression is, sadness and avoidance, right? But focusing on the practical, helping them with the practical implementation, what do they need to be responsible for, right? And then encouragement. I mean, it's always amazing to me how a little bit of encouragement can go a long way. Nobody wants to hear you constantly have to do anything. If I did everything that I should do, wow, I'd be Miss Universe, who knows? But my point is that you really, you have to give them some hope throughout this process. Now, a couple of things. Having the executive conversations, audit card. Audits can help get the attention, but use it sparingly. Because if the only reason that they're doing this is because of audit, and sometimes that's okay to at least get the activity started, the program started, but if you're constantly relying on audit to move the program forward, you've missed the opportunity, right? You're always going to be in compliance land. You use audit to get you off the ground, but then as you are educating them, you have to have the continued conversation of what's in it for them. Throughout all of this, if there's one thing I want you to take away, governance and getting what you want is about making it their win, not yours. I mean, at the end of the day, do you really care? As long as you get what you need, right? And you want them to be a champion. But you use that audit card too much, they're going to start to drown you out. And then acceptance. Well, acceptance, not everybody's so happy about everything, right? But that was the best graphic I could find, by the way. Eliminating the previous behaviors. A lot of that happens when you educate people. And you can see that they're calm. You can see that they're focused on solutions. In acceptance, they're not necessarily happy to see me, right? But they're not going to throw me out either, and we're not going to spend the whole session with them complaining, right? Take acceptance where you can get it. And then assignment of resources. That's a big one. All right. So as you go through this, and we've talked about identifying where they are and how to get them past it, recognizing that in any sort of crisis, that going through it is not linear, right? People go back and forth between stages. The other piece is it can be frustrating. And recognizing for us as practitioners, it can be frustrating for us, and to check that. Because we're helping them through the process. Then, more than one conversation is going to be needed. And bite-sized chunks, right, when you go in there. The other thing with an executive is that there is always an ask, right? What do you need from them? Telling them that the sky is falling and we have security holes all over the place, but you don't have an ask or a plan, isn't going to get you anywhere, right? Do you need their support? Do you need money? What do you need? And then think in terms of 1 to 3 years, right? You don't want that quick hit. And then the last thing, like I said, you're not a therapist, but there are times that you're going to see that you need to back off. There's some people that I see that are like a pit bull, right? They get in there and they're like, we're going to talk about cybersecurity every meeting. It's going to be your top priority or I'm going to die trying, right? How does that work when our kids do with us? La, la, la. Mommy can't hear you now. I'm going to have a drink. Bye. All right. So let's talk about common governance issues. These are the things that I see over and over again. All right, I am going to get a bottle of water. All right, I'm going to get you to open this, because otherwise I'm going to do that weird drop the mic thing. Oh, that'd be kind of fun. Drop it. I've never done that during a presentation before. Karen has left the building. Boom. All right. So, the first thing. I was speaking at the National School Board Association. What month are we in? June? I was speaking to them at the end of March. And I'm on this panel, and I'm sitting with two other people, and we're talking about policy, right? And they said, well, and now the National School Board Association, by the way, is the association of all the elected school board officials across the United States. So they said, somebody said, you know what, we got this policy that we put in front of the school board for passwords in the locality. And that's going to be our school-wide security policy, right? Does anybody think that the board should be approving password policy? Right? The level is policy, and I've seen people really screw up by having the war and peace version of policy. Very simple when you're doing board policy. Statement of the intent of the policy, who's responsible, commitment of resources, accountable parties. And by the way, when accountable party really is much as you can shrink that down, we're empowering the director, agency executive, what have you, to implement cybersecurity. That's how high level. Excuse me. And then reporting, their commitment to making sure that they're getting regular reports. So a question that I got today was, how do you make sure it's not a one-hit wonder, right? It is now part of best practices for boards to annually receive cybersecurity updates. If you're not doing that, you need to go back and have a conversation, because it's just as much of a control as an accounting control. It's just as important. And so when you're there focusing on the ask, right? Many times when I've dealt with boards, you don't want to come in with a laundry list, right? You're educating them. First time you're in front of it, here are the responsibilities, here's what this looks like. We're going to be coming to you with a policy in the future. We would appreciate your consideration. Okay, come back, give them the policy ahead of time, present the policy, we ask for your approval, right? Very simple. And then the next time, now we have your approval, we're asking for the resources, here's what they're used for. Getting in front of them without an ask and keeping it targeted, you've lost your opportunity if you're doing that. So, once you get the board policy approved, the big thing is you're just looking for the commitment, right? And this, you would be surprised. Everybody goes, well, that's simple. But what happens is the board policy, or what should be the board policy, ends up as a policy at the CEO level. And if they have a board, great. If the CEO, if that's the highest point of the organization, fantastic. But when you have a board and it doesn't go any farther past that, they're not going to get it. Their direction's going to be different, and it's going to be the first thing that's cut. So, once that board is established, excuse me, the first thing you need to look at are resources. Now, I'm constantly amazed. People will spend gobs of money on tools, and I think that's fantastic. But where do 90% of data breaches come from? People, not the hardware or the software necessarily. It's data, so when you talk about resources, it's beyond just, okay, give us money for a tool. Sometimes it's people. And when you're doing that and you're having the discussion, there needs to be a line item in the budget for security. And you'll be surprised how many times that I'll go in and I'm helping an organization, there's not a line item for security. And even if that line item were in the IT budget, okay, but there needs to be some allocation. That's twofold. One is, obviously, it makes sure that you have something that you can spend against. But when it makes it to the board level, it's part of ongoing operations. They start to see it. In a way, that's part of training your board. So, excuse me, when you're in some organizations, great. If the CISO or the chief risk officer, they are reporting to the CEO, generally they have spend authority, right? In these situations where you have an ISO under a CIO, then those discussions about spend authority become really important. And there are times, that's the reason why nowadays many regulators are pushing for the ISO to come out from the CIO because it's a conflict of interest, but also the siphoning of resources to other IT initiatives. And then information security doesn't get anything.
I just have a comment, if you wouldn't mind.
Please.
I think with the first bullet there with your line item for information security, I think that everyone needs to be prepared that that line item might be much, much bigger than the whole IT budget.
Sometimes.
Yeah, it just depends.
Yeah. And I will tell you, and this is what I counsel a lot of people on, is they think, oh my gosh, it's going to be forever. It takes a whole lot of effort and resources to build a program. It takes far less to manage it. And so also putting that in context as well. All right, a couple of other quick things as we go through that I see. CISO only wants to stay in their lane, right? And that's great. Are we done? You get
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Oh, I could do this in 3 minutes. I'm at the end of it anyway, so all right. Recognizing, sometimes I deal with ISOs and they're just like, listen, I only want to stay technical. These management conversations, that's the CIO. Well, guess what? You're not going to get what you want from a governance standpoint. And if the organization embraces those best practices, CIO shouldn't be delivering the security updates anyway. So communicating on their level, we talked about that already, not inundating them with information. What is it, how is it in a manner that they can understand and what's the ask? I say sell, but really selling the importance of information security, right? And then tying it to business initiatives. Every single business initiative uses some sort of technology. Every single business initiative should also have a cybersecurity line item to it. If that's not happening, that's a governance problem. Because when you're creating data, you're storing, transmitting, or processing it, you need to secure it. And then knowing when, again, to use the audit and compliance card. Any questions about that? Because that's a big one. All right. Now, a quick comment about board training. Because I think that board training is maybe slightly above a colonoscopy for most ISOs, right? Nobody likes to do board training, but most of the time you're overthinking it. The training is very simple. What is it? What's your responsibilities for it? And what are we doing to make sure it's handled? Period. End of story. And then later on, you're going to ask them to make decisions about things. But most of the people on the board, they're overwhelmed. And recognizing that you need to give them options. Hey, we're going to talk about this at a high level at the board training. If you want more information, feel free. I'm happy to sit down with you and have those discussions. They can't govern what they don't know. And that's what we constantly fight with. So the board training, and the reason I'm putting this out there, it can't be a once and done thing. It has to be annually, and board training should be included with new board member training. Anybody coming on there, you don't want them to wait. And no hell in the handbasket updates. I mean, obviously, if it's a data breach, you got to have those discussions with the board. But if everything is we're all gloom and doom, they're going to shut you out. It needs to be about how are we improving, how are we making this better? All right, so I've got the STFU sign. St. Fu. All right, any questions? Because I could definitely stay here and answer any questions after this, but I want to be respectful. Questions?
2 slides ago, your last bullet was about make a business case to finance. Most of your talk is about CIO boards, getting them on board. but a lot of this TARCOM is really going to figure out, finance is going to want to know return on investment.
Right.
That, to me, is a bigger thing than
Right.
getting the board excited.
Okay. So there's two ways to do this. The first thing is when you're doing security business cases and you're tying it to a business initiative, right? The concept of this is enabling this business initiative to occur, right? Because you're not going to be hacked, all that good stuff. The other piece is for an overall program, it's a simple cost avoidance. Now, I will caution you, because the first thing that your budget finance person is going to say is, oh, this is just like insurance, right? And they're usually going to want to cut those things. I'm here to tell you that it is now part of underwriting. How many people have gone through the cybersecurity underwriting challenge for insurance, right? So here's how it works. And this is why, when you're having the conversation about the business case, it now ties into the corporate insurance. And as they go through the underwriting, if you don't have the program, if you don't have the technical controls, if it's just a checkbox, yeah, we have that, great, they're going to issue you the policy. Then, if you have a data breach, they're going to come in with that free forensic person that they said that they were going to give you, right? Who, by the way, isn't working for your best interest. And they're going to collect the information on that data breach that they're then going to use to deny the claim. So recognizing that's sort of the story you need to provide for the business case. We could talk more about that, but hopefully that answered it at a top level. Yes, sir.
So yeah, just to that point, when I was doing information security management system implementation, people would ask why we do this, and insurance is the exact case. You get insurance. Insurance company's going to find any reason they can to deny that claim, unless you can show due care. Having a certified management system in place is one of the things that shows due care that you're actually doing what you need to do.
There was a talk at RVAsec, I think, in 2016 about that, and I recommend going and finding it about insurance and the cybersecurity industry. So if you have, I think it's on the YouTube channel, but it's really good.
Great. Anything else?
You guys can stay afterwards. We're at a break now,
Yep.
so come down and check.
Thank you all very much. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.